War is a complicated business. But what if I told you that there's another side to this business you don't hear? It is constantly evolving, from using swords, bows, and spears to using guns, tanks, and missiles. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the use of mercenaries or soldiers for hire, who fight wars purely for profit. Often called the world's second oldest profession, mercenaries have evolved into today's private military companies, PMCs. Approximately 50,000 private military contractors operate in conflict zones worldwide, which is more than most militaries in Europe. These modern mercenaries work for governments, corporations, warlords, and rebels, operating in the shadows of conflicts from Iraq and Afghanistan to more recent battlegrounds in Ukraine, Gaza, and Iran. PMCs are loyal to no one, no nation, cause, or flag, only the highest bidder. They've been implicated in serious human rights violations and war crimes so gruesome that they leave families devastated. Yet, somehow, they continue to shape the outcomes of conflicts across the globe. This isn't a conspiracy theory, but the grim reality of modern warfare, a mysterious force that operates solely for profit. Welcome to Big Truth Media. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on this shadowy billion-dollar industry. We'll expose how these corporate armies operate, reveal why world governments can't seem to break their addiction to mercenary forces, and uncover the disturbing reality of what happens when killing becomes just another business model. But first, let me tell you about the two men who started it all. Two restless World War II veterans sit in a London pub, nursing their drinks and wrestling with a problem that would soon make them millionaires. David Sterling, founder of the legendary SAS, a special forces unit that fought behind enemy lines, and John Woodhouse, a decorated veteran who had spent decades perfecting the art of warfare. Now, as the world moved on from their glory days, they faced a sobering reality. Their lethal skills were becoming obsolete. But instead of fading into retirement, these men had a different idea. What if military expertise didn't have to die with the uniform? What if you could bottle decades of combat experience, package it into a sleek corporate structure, and sell it to anyone willing to pay? What if war itself could become a product? That conversation would birth an industry that generates more revenue than most countries' defense budgets. And with that, they founded WatchGuard International, one of the first known private military companies, offering security services and military aid to the highest bidder. Their first major contract came that same year, and the job, spying on Yemen's royalist forces during the country's civil war, a side Britain was claiming to support. And wouldn't you know it, the royalist forces ended up losing the war. Beyond espionage, they expanded into arms dealing, soldier training, and covert operations. Their boldest mission emerged in 1971, a plan to overthrow Libyan leader Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Although they had sight of him and were ready to take the shot, the British government shut it down. And then came the end of the Cold War, a golden era for private military companies as ex-military personnel flooded the job market. But it wasn't until 9/11 that everything changed. In just one morning, war itself was rewritten. The enemy no longer flew flags or marched in formation. They moved in the shadows and were faceless, stateless, and everywhere. America wasn't fighting countries anymore. It was fighting ideas, networks, and ghosts. Traditional armies weren't built for this kind of fight. They were slow, visible, and tied to rules of engagement that didn't apply anymore. But where government saw chaos, private military companies saw opportunity. Just like that, the flame sparked by WatchGuard in 1971 would become a raging fire. When governments were in desperate need of PMCs, new firms like Blackwater, Aegis, and Kini Miani were flooded with contracts. They had the skills, the gear, and most crucially, the deniability. In a war without borders, they became the perfect weapon. You see, after the Cold War, many countries slashed military budgets and downsized their armies. Thousands of trained soldiers were left jobless. Then came the chaos, 9/11s, civil wars in Africa, and global instability. Governments found themselves overwhelmed, their forces stretched thin, and the public increasingly sensitive to casualties, especially with the cameras rolling. That's when they turned to a new kind of solution: private military companies. One of the most extreme examples was Sierra Leone. Imagine a country where children are forced to become soldiers, where entire villages are wiped out for sport, and the government was so powerless that it couldn't do anything. Well, that was the grim reality of Sierra Leone, as it was caught up in a war with the rough rebel forces. These rebels turned the country into a playground of unimaginable horror. They burned down houses, took over cities, and even the country's diamond mines, using the money to fund their war against the government, wiping out towns and villages in the process. They committed a list of unspeakable crimes like torture, rape, slavery, and worst of all, kidnapping and forcing kids to go to war against their own country. The government, realizing the RUF was just 20 miles from the capital city of Freetown, went into full panic mode. Some reports even suggested that high-ranking government officials were already jumping ship, switching sides to save themselves. Desperate and out of options, the government made frantic calls for help, reaching out to the United States, the UK, France, and even the United Nations. But no one wanted to step into a war they knew couldn't be won, especially with a country that couldn't pay them back. Except for one company, Executive Outcomes. When they arrived in Sierra Leone, they wasted no time. The first step was retraining the army and local volunteers in modern bush warfare. Then, with just a few hundred well-equipped fighters, they took on thousands of rough rebels, liberating cities, delivering food and medical aid, freeing slaves in the mines, and rescuing child soldiers, all while turning the tide of the war. In less than a year, the rebels surrendered and signed a peace agreement. Executive Outcomes hadn't just fought a war, they stopped a genocide. But here's the thing that makes this story both inspiring and terrifying. Executive Outcomes didn't do it out of kindness. They did it because the government of Sierra Leone promised them a large percentage of the diamond mining profits. The success of Executive Outcomes sent a clear message. Private armies could do what governments couldn't do. But it wasn't until after 9/11 that the private military industry truly went global. When the U.S. declared war on terrorism in Afghanistan and Iraq, it faced a new kind of war, one that required boots on the ground, local intelligence, secure facilities, convoy protection, training of Afghan forces, and a long list of covert operations. But the U.S. military was overstretched and unprepared for this new, unconventional battlefield. So they outsourced it. Companies like Blackwater stepped in for the right price. They handled the dirty work quickly and quietly, without the political baggage. And from there, the floodgates opened. Former soldiers and savvy businessmen launched private military firms that raked in billion-dollar contracts to do everything, from protecting officials in Iraq to training militias in the Middle East, to securing oil fields and diamond mines across Africa. With billion-dollar contracts pouring in and no allegiance to any flag, PMCs quickly became a go-to solution for messy conflicts that needed covert operations. But that raises the question, how do they work? Unlike national armies, which operate under strict government regulations and a defined chain of command, PMCs operate as businesses, offering their services to the highest bidder, like governments, dictators, international organizations like the UN, and even criminals. They fill the gap that most traditional armies leave, acting as a 911 service for them, with operations that range from combat missions to logistics, intelligence gathering, and training. PMCs work in legal gray areas where strict international laws may be lacking, which allows them to operate across borders with a degree of plausible deniability. This means that when a government hires a PMC, they perform military-related tasks that the military cannot perform or are ordered not to. During the war in Iraq, Blackwater was hired to protect diplomats and high-profile figures from the State Department. While some argue the U.S. military would have done the job, it's safe to say that they didn't want any American soldiers dying in the war because it would look bad to the taxpayers and it would save the government a lot of money. I know you're wondering how it's saving the government money, considering it costs a fortune to hire a PMC. Well, the answer is simple. Every operation in the military, especially during wartime, is often overpaid for and doubled in the defense budget. That's why the government doesn't shy away from hiring them, although these PMCs bid for these contracts at very high profit margins. While the full details of their contracts remain totally confidential, PMCs operate at a totally different level from the military. You see, unlike your regular military, these PMCs are often regarded as better when it comes to their recruitment, training, and operations. PMCs recruit ex-military personnel with companies like Blackwater, recruiting Navy SEALs, Marines, and Special Ops, and Wagner recruiting ex-Russian soldiers, prisoners, and foreign nationals from Syria, North Korea, and Africa. While companies like Executive Outcomes didn't just hire ex-soldiers, they recruited from South Africa's most elite and controversial units. Many of their operatives were former apartheid-era secret forces, trained specifically to suppress uprisings and crush resistance during one of the most brutal regimes in modern history. To understand who these men were, you have to understand apartheid, which was a system of racial segregation enforced by South Africa's white minority government from 1948 to 1994. Under apartheid, laws divided people by race, restricted where they could live, work, and study, and stripped non-white citizens of basic human rights. These operatives weren't just soldiers, they were experts in counterinsurgency, psychological warfare, and brutal suppression. And after apartheid ended, many of them found a new purpose, not in defending a nation, but in selling their skills to the highest bidder. Thanks to their ruthless recruitment tactics, PMCs often skip the hard part of finding the right people. Most of their hires are already battle-hardened veterans, making training easier, but also very different. While some PMCs stick to standard drills, others take things to extreme levels, with brutal, unconventional methods, no matter your past military experience. We had to do all this crazy stuff. We'd have to put an AK-47 together out of a box, and I'm just like copying people, man, fake it till you make it. I'm like looking over, and some guy's like fiddling around. I'm like, bro, help me out, bro, whatever. And then we'd have to go qual on the range at the 200-yard range and shoot the AK-47. Then we have to shoot this 203 grenade like at this mailbox 400 meters away, like the maximum distance the winds are blowing, like on the golf course. But understanding their training is only half the story. The real question is how they put these skills to use in actual operations. While PMCs receive contracts from their clients to protect diplomats, secure facilities, and conduct various security operations, it's their unique operational strategy that truly sets them apart from traditional military forces. Let's take Blackwater, for instance. Their operational strategy relied on aggression, autonomy, and rapid response to threats. In the Afghan and Iraqi wars, they had this aggressive and imposing look that dealt a blow to the terrorists, making them not be attacked or ambushed like the Army. I'll tell you the why Blackwater didn't get hit more and the Army would get hit all the time is because we were so ultra-aggressive, because perception is reality to the enemy. If he sees a dude with a mohawk with a plate hanger, this big, tattooed everywhere. Not that that makes you hard, but tattooed everywhere with a beard, and you've got a 240 machine gun grenade, launcher grenades all by you, and you're this far out of your turret. Gunner looking like a G like this with headphones on, right, dude? Nobody wants a piece of that. What made them very effective was how this aggressive mindset was imbued into their rules of engagement. Unlike regular soldiers, they had far fewer restrictions on how and when they could use force. If I feel like my life, or my team, or equipment's life is in danger, if any of those three are in danger, deadly force is authorized. Okay, that's the Blackwater rules of engagement. While it's a great way to survive a bunch of terrorists, their rules of engagement have sparked some ethical concerns, which have claimed innocent lives. Like my buddy came in that one day distraught. He says, "Man, I don't know what to do, bro." I said, "What happened?" He said, a man and a wife and 2 kids were in a car they were in, and the car sped up on us. He said he came out of the rear of the SUV, because you're edged in and you can lean all the way outside of the SUV. And he said, he pointed at him and he was like, and he's looking at him. He says, and he looked, and right as he was firing, he says he could tell they were just arguing. And so he shot once, and when they saw him, all right, the driver, the Iraqi driver, just went like this and just went right off the bridge. I think bridge 6 or whatever killed them all. That's the kind of stuff that happened all the time because it happened so quickly. While you think Blackwater's ethics are crazy, wait till you see how Wagner takes it to an entirely different level. All PMCs chase profits. But Wagner operates on an unprecedented scale. Over 70% of their known global activities are tied to resource exploitation. Since 2015, they've secured oil fields in Syria, long before the Assad regime's collapse. In the Central African Republic, they've provided security, but not for free. In return, they've gained control over lucrative mines. But oil fields and mines are just part of the equation. Wagner's reach extends far beyond, serving as a shadow force for the Kremlin. Whether it's fighting in proxy wars, arming and advising the Houthi rebels in Yemen, or supporting dictators, they leave their mark. And wherever they go, one thing remains constant: resources, influence, and a brutal efficiency that leaves the world wondering, where will they strike next? But as brutal as Wagner's operations are, there are times when they go so far beyond their ruthless agreements that it forces you to question the very limits of human cruelty. Because there are rules even in war. And then there's Wagner. Wagner's reputation isn't just built on shadowy contracts and unchecked power, it's tainted by blood. They've been accused of war crimes time and time again, but no incident is as horrifying as what surfaced in 2017. A gruesome video, filmed by Wagner mercenaries themselves, showed them torturing and beheading a Syrian man. They didn't just kill him, they made a spectacle of it. They beat him with a sledgehammer, severed his limbs, and desecrated his corpse in ways too horrific to describe. And this was just one documented case. And in Ukraine, the accusations are just as chilling. Human rights groups and Ukrainian officials claim Wagner fighters have executed civilians and prisoners of war, leaving behind a trail of atrocities. Yet, despite global outrage, not a single Wagner operative has faced justice. Why? Because Wagner isn't just a private military company, it's a phantom force, an unofficial weapon of the Russian state. And as long as the Kremlin denies their existence, the real question isn't just how far they've gone, it's how much further they'll go. You might think Wagner represents the absolute worst of private military contractors, ruthless, unaccountable, and operating in complete darkness. But here's the thing. This isn't a Russian problem. It's not even a Wagner problem. It's a private military problem. Because when you give a group of armed mercenaries unlimited power and tell them they're above the law, the same pattern emerges every single time. It doesn't matter if they're Russian, American, or from anywhere else on the planet. Take Blackwater. This was an American company backed by the U.S. government, bound by regulations, operating under strict oversight. At least, that's what we were told. Stop. Blackwater was once an elite force, tasked with securing U.S. interests in Iraq and Afghanistan. They protected diplomats, guarded VIPs, and operated in the shadows. But their name became infamous after one incident shattered their reputation forever. On the 16th of September 2007, a Blackwater convoy opened fire in the crowded Nisour Square in Baghdad. 17 civilians were killed. At least 20 others were wounded. Blackwater claimed they were responding to an ambush, but multiple investigations, including an FBI probe, found no evidence of a threat. The reality? Innocent people were gunned down in broad daylight. The massacre sparked international outrage, fueled tensions between Iraq and the U.S., and raised uncomfortable questions about the role of private military contractors. Unlike Wagner, some Blackwater operatives did face justice. 4 men were convicted in 2014. But even that was undone, as in 2020, they would get pardoned by President Trump, a move condemned by human rights groups and the Iraqi government. But Nisour Square was just one chapter in Blackwater's dark history. There were more accusations, mass murders, drug trafficking, and even selling weapons to terrorist groups. One of the most chilling incidents was when Dan Carroll, Blackwater's head of operations in Iraq, allegedly threatened to kill a State Department investigator who was probing the company's reckless behavior. It was a stark warning. Blackwater saw itself above the law, and anyone who got in their way would pay the price. Even as the scandals piled up, Blackwater operated with near-total impunity. When lawsuits emerged, they weren't just about wrongful deaths. One case alleged Blackwater killed its operative to silence him before he could testify about the PMC's secret dealings, like weapons smuggling, encouraging the killing of Iraqis, laundering money, and engaging in child prostitution. Another lawsuit, filed by a legal advocacy group, accused them of war crimes, describing their actions in Iraq as brutal, barbaric, and completely unchecked. Eventually, the pressure became too much. Blackwater's immunity in Iraq was revoked, but that didn't mean the end, it just meant a name change. After multiple rebrands and acquisitions, it now operates under Constellus Holdings, different name, but the same game. But that raises a bigger question. Why does the system love them? Governments love private military contractors. They're cheaper than a standing army, willing to take on the dirtiest jobs, and most importantly, they operate in legal gray zones. But at their core, PMCs aren't just military forces, they're businesses. And like any business, profit comes first. That's where things spiral. Cutting corners, exploiting resources, turning a blind eye to civilian casualties, it all becomes part of the equation. And when things go too far, there's always an escape route. Legal loopholes, immunity clauses, and political pardons shield them from consequences. Today, it's Blackwater. Tomorrow, it's Wagner. After that, who's next? War has nothing to do with right or wrong. It's just a matter of, do you have violent men? If you do, then you're never attacked.